Where the fuck is Bernie Sanders?
Yeah.
Where Bernie, dude, my man, you and I have stuck by Bernie. We've both got our images of the man. Has he let me down? Sure, he has. But I think that I've always kind of come back to the idea that, Bernie inspired both of us. There's no Vanguard without Bernie Sanders. There's no us believing in a grander alternative, right? Us not being fucking cynical assholes that are just totally resigned to just be like, politics is fucked, bro. Fuck all this shit. No, he made me care, and he made me be like, no, if you learn this shit and you really invest your time and you hit the books and you talk to people, can be persuaded by these ideas. People, you can make a difference. You can challenge these orthodoxies. And then 2016 happened, and he definitely changed, and I was ready to just support him anyway. And not, and I was like, Bernie knows what's best. This man's been doing it for all this time. We should trust him. And I think that this piece that Glenn wrote this morning, or at least published this morning, I think he raises a lot of fair criticisms of Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, I agree. And I don't remember who made this point. It might have even been Glenn Greenwald himself. So I'm giving credit or whatever. But it is true that when Bernie dropped out of his campaign and basically allowed his campaign to dissolve, his base of support was bigger than the entire, DSA nationally. He basically had the biggest activist left organization built up in the entire country for decades and decades, and essentially just kind of let it dissipate as soon as he bowed out, which I think is ultimately the biggest, sin or fuck up of the 2020 campaign. Obviously, Bernie was in a hard spot, and we've talked about that 100 times, but and I think that Glenn Greenwald lays out the case too here for, essentially Bernie just snarking or, kind of being so condescending towards the idea of a deep state, and the deep state having kind of political wills that they wish to enact.
Which he commented on himself multiple times, calling out the Washington Post and other things, which Glenn points to here. The main point that Glenn talks about, or at least one of them, is the fact that Bernie's kind of flirted with and indulged this Russiagate hoax fantasy kind of a deal, this completely, utterly substanceless story. And by not challenging it and just kind of playing along, he disempowered himself a lot. He has this quote: reflecting on his 2020 strategy of trying to appease the Democratic establishment in lieu of his more successful 2016 strategy of proudly positioning himself as its adversary, Sanders by this point had repeatedly echoed the maximalist conspiracy theories about Trump and Russia, leaving him with little room to maneuver once this Cold War tactic was predictably deployed against him. After suggesting the leak to the Post was intended to harm his campaign, he had no other options beyond sputtering with faux toughness about how he could show Putin who was boss. In other words, both prior to the leak and after, Sanders repeatedly validated rather than scorned the CIA's Russian narrative, just as he did with the equally cynical Bernie Bro attacks. So it put him on a defensive crouch for the rest of his campaign, unable to explain why Putin, public enemy number one among the Democratic Party base, was trying to help him win. And this is, I think, a stellar point made by Glenn, because had he just come out and said, there's no evidence for this, these are the same people that lied us into Iraq, these are the same people that lied us into all kinds of other shenanigans, are you really going to believe the intelligence community after all this? I'm the guy that voted against, whatever, right?
Yep. And this is, just so indicative of the entire problem with the Bernie Sanders campaign. They put this clip here where Bernie, right before the Nevada caucus, basically, mocked the Washington Post for this piece and called it what it was, and said, they've been big friends to our campaign, basically acknowledging the fact that the Washington Post was working, as a wing of the corporate oligarchy to try to, kill his campaign, or at least cripple it, as he says at one point. But yeah, he legitimized that very Russian smear Russiagate story itself not that long ago. I mean, he never really denied that it was a legitimate story when they were using it against Donald Trump. So when they turn around and use it against him, what is he supposed to do? Say, well, I mean, it was right then, but not now? That makes you look like a hypocrite, because that's basically saying, well, if you're smearing my political opponent, then it's okay, but you can't smear me with the same smear. So it is hypocritical.
And it would go against Bernie's whole political platform as the principled,
Exactly. Yeah. So basically he ended up, I mean, this was a good moment. I'm glad he called it out. I remember when that happened, but Glenn Greenwald is totally correct. If he had just from the very beginning said, no, this is a horseshit story, there's no evidence for this, it's xenophobic, and it's actually going to hurt the Democratic Party and the country, then he would have, from the get-go, differentiated himself from the fucking pack of jackals that he ran against in the primary. All these people that he tried so hard to differentiate himself the entire primary, all these people that were trying so hard to sound like Bernie Sanders, with Medicare for all who won it, and trying to, basically claim his policies as their own, but when in reality they were selling watered down, means-tested horseshit versions of his policies. The real way to differentiate himself from this pack of jackals would have been to, not go along with this Russiagate story and not, go on TV and validate it, or MSNBC and try to play along with this, ridiculous smear against a sitting president who you could go after in 1,000 legitimate ways. So I think that's just what's so fucking annoying about this, and it really does. It's just such like I said, so indicative of Bernie's major failure, which was to separate himself from the crowd, to, tell people, be clear and open about it, that he was the only real, option on stage, that all of the other ones were fucking criminals and liars in no uncertain terms, and that he was the only legitimate option up there. He failed to do that, and this is just one of the biggest, examples of why, and I think it's absolutely valid to talk about.
Yeah, and I think it also comes down to the fact that, and you mentioned Thomas Frank, who we're going to be doing a large bulk, Radical Reads episode on. He's also from Kansas. We're big fans of his work. Would love to get him on the show someday. But, one of the things that, he constantly harps on in his book, The People Know, is that, there was this, after the rise of Trump and Sanders, there was this absolute demagoguery of like popular uprisings, bucking establishment authority, like the common man being able to go against the expert, right? And they essentially drew a through line between Trump and Bernie Sanders. Now, I understand the logic of that, right? Because they're two candidates with popular support. However, it's totally disingenuous to pretend that they have popular support for all of the same reasons, right? Like they might tap into similar energies and similar frustrations, but obviously what they're selling is completely different, right? Just because they have just because a candidate has popular support doesn't mean they're the people that love to demagogue the word populist to be like a racist, anti-plural, what's it called? Anti-plurality. Meaning you don't like anybody other than like what you are, right? So I think that he got really scared by all of those attacks, right? Like Glenn, in passing in this article, mentions the Bernie Bro attacks as being completely disingenuous. Katie Halper hosted the Katie Halper show, and Coast Useful Idiots. She did this whole thing during the primary where she was tracking like actually whether or not Bernie Bros were in, or Bernie supporters were in any way like more vicious or vile on Twitter, and essentially it just kind of came out to no, and the only reason that you could possibly argue that it is just because there's more people online being active supporting Bernie Sanders than there were any other candidate, because he had a very online group outside of like somebody like say Donald Trump, who also happens to have a very online constituency. But I think that he was kind of worried by all those comparisons that the establishment media, who he already talked about in 2016 being actively against him, and the blackout. So it's kind of like Bernie got into this like weird problem where he was like unafraid. He was like unwilling to go up against any kind of Democratic Party line, and all those Democratic Party lines were used to fuck him. And so he would be like, oh yeah, like vaguely, the media is bad. But anytime CNN actively fucked him, he would be like, well, this is just, whatever. He wouldn't come out and say it because he was too afraid of being, labeled as like this fake newser, right? Because he was too afraid of being looped in with this like anti-authority, anti-expert mentality that had been used to slander Donald Trump for 4 years. What he should have been is saying, no, fuck all of you. Like, I am going to say exactly what I mean. This is what I mean. And, let the people make up their minds. Because that's more what he was doing in 2016. And I think people had a lot of respect for that.
Yeah, what Bernie should have done, because you're 100% right, Bernie was terrified and mortified that he was being connected to Donald Trump, that his movement and Donald Trump's movement were being connected and, called the same by the media. Essentially, he hated that. But what he should have done from the beginning was acknowledge that, yes, what Donald Trump tapped into was populism, and that the demands he was making, the things he was saying, what he was calling out Hillary Clinton and his fellow Republicans on the stage for was all mostly legitimate stuff. The corruption that he called out, the military-industrial complex, the outsourcing, most namely. Bernie Sanders should have said, Donald Trump actually accurately identified a lot of this stuff, but he's a fake populist and I'm a real one. That's what he should have done from the beginning. He should have made that distinction clear. He should have said, yes, Donald Trump's a fake populist. Of course he's playing the hand of populism. That's not totally.
This is a democracy. You have to win the will of the people. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? That's what politics is supposed to be. Yeah.
But he never even legitimized any of the actual what made people vote for Trump in the first place. He never said, actually, a lot of people voted for Trump because he said they would bring back their jobs to these communities that have been devastated by the in the wars. He never said, I understand why you voted for him, and you should actually vote for me because I'm actually going to do those things. Instead, he largely kind of just called Trump, this racist, xenophobic, bigoted character, which of course he is, but he kind of just reduced Trump down to this, corrupt, like racist Nixon type of figure, this super corrupt, super racist guy, but he's just a demagogue. He's just this loser. He's just this fucking dictator or whatever.
Yeah, it kind of had the basket of deplorables kind of thing where it felt like he was attacking the voters who had supported Trump.
Exactly. And I think that part of that was because he was also terrified in 2016, after 2016, of being labeled, this candidate who's only trying to appeal to the white working class and who's not trying to form an actual multiracial coalition, which of course Bernie Sanders did do both times, and it's ridiculous to say otherwise. That was always a smear, but I think Bernie kind of doubled down on that and might have made a sacrifice of some voters by not, like I said, addressing why they voted for Trump in the first place and offering a real alternative to the faux populism of Donald Trump. Instead, he just basically
world traveler. I was literally just about to say this. Chris Hedges makes this observation all the time. He was terrified of being Ralph Nadered. Exactly what we need if we're ever going to take on the establishment is somebody like Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader's politics are not like a 1,000,000% my politics, right? He's not like, trying to seize the means of production and fucking, instill workplace democracies. But what he was really doing was at a time when it was not, that salient. Ralph Nader was coming up in the time of like the resurgence of business, right? Like when business was like taking back over control, like after the Truman days had ended and FDR, right? And we were moving back towards more of a business friendly society and country. He actually got famous for being like, there were seatbelts in cars for Ralph Nader, like the smoking stuff. That was a lot of Ralph Nader, like a lot of consumer protections. That's all Ralph Nader. And I feel like that doesn't ever get sung. He's just vilified. And like, what the fuck did this guy do besides fuck up the 2001 election? No, he did way more, I would argue, than, even Al Gore. It was definitely more positive shit than Al Gore did leading up to 2001. Obviously, Al Gore was just fucking vice president of a horrible ass administration under Bill Clinton. Ralph Nader had actually, stood up for people and done good.
Yeah, totally. And I think that, World Traveler is totally correct. He was also terrified of just going down as, the new Ralph Nader and being caricatured as this, guy who handed the election to the Republicans and, cost America a president that it should have had and all this bullshit, when in reality, he should have said, Donald Trump didn't win because of me. Donald Trump won because Hillary Clinton ran a miserable campaign where she didn't promise the people of middle America or the Rust Belt or industrial parts of this country anything. She didn't offer them a compelling case to vote for her, instead of this guy who's parading around giving them a million reasons to vote for him. And obviously, to intellectual people that pay attention, it's clear that Donald Trump is a con man. And it's clear that the dude wasn't, going to follow up on a lot of what he was saying, that he was being a trickster and a con man from the beginning. That's obviously, apparent to someone like me who has paid attention and who, understands Donald Trump's life story, the way he's behaved his entire life, the way he's conducted business. But as we've talked about so many times, a lot of people just don't have the time or energy to educate themselves to that extent. They just see what's on TV and they go with it. And Donald Trump was a way more fucking charismatic and confident and, inspiring presence on television than Hillary Clinton was, and he was certainly promising a lot of more exciting sounding things to people in those parts of the country. So I just think this whole thing is, including on Bernie's part, is such a failure of reflection, of introspection, of looking back and saying, why did we fail? Why did this guy win? And how can we combat it? And this is why we are where we are, and why Bernie Sanders ran kind of the toothless campaign that he did, or not, I don't toothless, whatever the word is. He didn't have the bite to it. He didn't have the ferocity or the ability to call out someone like Joe Biden or Pete Buttigieg for being an establishment tool. The furthest he ever went was just to say, you're in favor of the status quo and I'm not. Like, that doesn't really translate in as effectively or compellingly as it needs to. And he simply needed to be a lot more like Donald Trump was in the 2016 Republican primary, unafraid to call out his opponents, unafraid to call out corruption. Obviously, one of the low points of the entire Bernie campaign was when he apologized for the Zephyr teach-out.
Yeah, fucking ridiculous.
Where she, accurately called out Joe Biden's corruption. Of course, then Joe Biden went on to win the presidential nomination, which, pretty much proved why Zephyr's argument in the first place was so necessary to make. So, necessary to explain to a lot of people who, like I said, might have a peripheral understanding of these issues, but haven't been following enough. They haven't read Biden Inc., the piece in Politico, which spells this all out. They haven't exposed themselves to the same litany of facts of behavior.
They haven't checked out the Vanguard blogs piece. Joe Biden is a lying dog-faced pony soldier. Check it out. We'll put the link in the description when we re-upload this video.
Yeah, that's one of our original pieces where we went into all of his corruption, all of that stuff, and there's so many examples again. But to someone who's not political, to someone who's not tuned into this stuff, it all just kind of sounds like noise. Joe Biden voted no on some bill. What? What? Who cares? 20 years ago, he said something on the House floor about Social Security. What? It doesn't really matter unless you have a bold, effective messenger, someone who's willing to repeat it over and over again on every cable news show until you can't deny it.
Yeah, that's how you can puncture the white noise.
Yeah, and that's why, and we don't have to have this discussion for the millionth time, but again, that's why, a lot of people, including myself, think that Nina Turner could be a very effective messenger for some of these very same policies, because she was one of the people in the Bernie campaign who was very insistent on calling out Joe Biden. She was like, we gotta, if we're not going to do this, then we're not going to win, because the people don't understand, and we have the ability to make them understand. And if we're not going to do it, then people are going to remain ignorant, because the mainstream media is not going to teach them.